In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court has struck down former President Trump's signature tariffs, changing how America handles global trade. The court's 6-3 ruling declared that the president cannot unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs without direct approval from Congress. This move reverses years of trade policy, impacts billions in commerce, and sends shockwaves through markets from New York to Shanghai. The decision quickly reverberated worldwide. Stock markets reacted within minutes, trade partners issued statements, and American businesses scrambled to reassess their supply chains. For millions of workers and families, this ruling promises changes to the prices of everyday goods and the security of their jobs. In just 15 seconds, the core message is clear. The Supreme Court has altered who controls America's trade future. This historic judgment will reshape relationships not just at home, but across the globe. In 2018, President Trump imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, and hundreds of billions in Chinese goods, citing national security and the need to protect American industries. The move quickly escalated into a trade war, impacting not just China, but also U.S. allies like Canada and the European Union. Economists warned of higher costs for American businesses and consumers. U.S. importers paid an extra $80 billion in tariff-related costs between 2018 and 2021. China retaliated with tariffs on American goods, triggering job losses in the Midwest. The battle lines were drawn, not just with rivals abroad, but within America itself. The legal fight over Trump's tariffs raised a key question: who sets America's trade policy? The Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. But over time, Congress has handed many trade powers to the president, especially during crises. Business groups and lawmakers challenged Trump's tariffs, arguing he overstepped by using a Cold War-era law to declare steel and aluminum imports a national security threat. The government argued the president needed flexibility to respond to foreign threats. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, recognizing its impact on the balance of power. At stake, can presidents reshape global trade alone, or must Congress always have the final say? On July 31, 2025, the Supreme Court announced its decision. In a 6-3 split, the majority held that Congress alone has the constitutional authority to impose broad tariffs. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice Roberts stated that while presidents have some discretion, they cannot use vague laws to justify sweeping trade actions without legislative approval. The opinion pointed to the Constitution's clear language and the dangers of unchecked executive power. Roberts wrote, "While the president may act swiftly in emergencies, trade policy affecting millions cannot rest on ambiguous statutes or open-ended delegations." He was joined by justices from both sides of the aisle, signaling a rare moment of bipartisan agreement on limits to presidential authority. The dissent, led by Justice Alito, warned that the decision would tie the president's hands and slow America's response to global crises. He argued that Congress had knowingly given the executive branch the tools it needed, and the court was undoing decades of precedent. Both sides agreed that the stakes were enormous, but the majority was clear: it was time for Congress to reclaim its role in crafting America's trade rules. The Supreme Court's ruling had immediate effects on markets and businesses. On the day of the decision, the Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped nearly 500 points, reflecting investor optimism that trade uncertainty would soon ease. Importers and retailers welcomed the news, anticipating lower costs on goods ranging from electronics to cars. Major U.S. manufacturers, however, were divided. Companies like Ford and GM, who had benefited from steel tariffs, expressed concern about increased foreign competition. Meanwhile, the American Apparel and Footwear Association celebrated the end of tariffs, projecting consumer savings of at least $10 billion annually. Global markets also responded. The yuan and euro strengthened slightly against the dollar, as investors anticipated a thaw in trade tensions. At the same time, Chinese and European officials called for renewed negotiations, eager to rebuild trade flows disrupted by years of tariffs. For American workers and families, the impact was more complex. The ruling promised cheaper goods and more choice, but also raised fears about job losses in industries that had relied on protection. Across the country, the end of Trump's tariffs sent ripples through communities and households. For millions of families, the most immediate effect was a drop in the price of imported goods. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated that the average household could save up to $800 a year on everyday products like appliances, clothing, and electronics. Small businesses that rely on imported materials breathed a sigh of relief. This decision will help us stay competitive and keep our doors open, said Maria Lopez, owner of a mid-sized furniture business in Texas. At the same time, workers in steel mills and aluminum plants expressed anxiety, fearing layoffs as cheaper imports return to U.S. shelves. The manufacturing sector faced tough choices. Some industries were forced to adapt by investing in new technology or shifting focus to higher-value products. Labor unions warned that Congress must act quickly to provide support, including retraining programs, to help displaced workers. Communities that had seen job growth during the tariff years now faced an uncertain future. The promise of lower prices was real, but so were the challenges for industries that had depended on government protection. The world took notice as the Supreme Court's decision reshaped global trade. China, the main target of Trump's tariffs, welcomed the ruling. Beijing immediately announced plans to lift retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural goods, paving the way for increased exports of soybeans, pork, and wine. Chinese officials called for a reset in U.S.-China economic relations. Canada and the European Union, both longtime U.S. allies caught in the crossfire, responded with cautious optimism. EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis stated, "This is a step toward fairer, more predictable transatlantic trade." Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau emphasized the opportunity to rebuild trust and strengthen North American supply chains. Yet, challenges remain. Some countries fear that congressional gridlock could delay new trade agreements or create uncertainty about future U.S. policy. Others are watching closely to see if Congress will support American industries vulnerable to foreign competition. The ruling also sets a precedent for how other democracies might handle the balance of power in trade policy. In a world of shifting alliances and economic rivalry, the U.S. Supreme Court has not just changed American rules, it may have inspired legal and political debates far beyond its borders. With the Supreme Court's decision, the responsibility for trade policy shifts squarely back to Congress. Lawmakers now face the challenge of crafting new rules that balance the needs of American workers, businesses, and consumers. This shift could mean more open debate, transparency, and democratic checks on trade decisions. However, Congress is deeply divided on how best to protect U.S. industries while keeping prices low. Some legislators call for targeted protections for critical sectors like steel, technology, and green energy. Others push for free trade policies that encourage competition and innovation. Hearings are already underway with lobbyists, labor leaders, and economists all vying for influence. For American workers, the new era brings both hope and uncertainty. Retraining programs, tax credits, and investment in research may cushion the blow for industries facing increased competition. Meanwhile, families and small businesses stand to benefit from lower costs and more choices. The coming months will test Congress's ability to act with speed and unity. The world is watching to see whether America's lawmakers can deliver a trade policy that works for all. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn Trump's tariffs marks a defining moment for American democracy and economic policy. By restoring congressional control over trade, the court reaffirmed the separation of powers at the heart of the U.S. Constitution. The ruling promises lower prices for consumers, new opportunities for trade, and a reset in global economic relations. Yet this new chapter brings challenges as well as opportunities. American workers in protected industries face the risk of job losses. Lawmakers must now deliver policies that support both competitiveness and fairness. Abroad, allies and rivals alike are recalibrating their approach to the United States, searching for stability after years of uncertainty. Ultimately, the decision is about more than tariffs or trade. It is a test of American democracy's ability to adapt to a changing world, and of Congress's willingness to lead. As America enters a new era in trade, the big question remains, how should the nation balance the needs of its workers, businesses, and families in a rapidly changing global economy? With Congress now in charge, will lawmakers find common ground, or will partisan divides stall progress? The choices made in the coming years will define America's economic strength, its leadership in the world, and its commitment to democratic principles. Will the United States embrace openness and innovation or seek new forms of protection? The world is watching, and the future is unwritten.